So math was my biggest weakness. I remember my very first test, it was on Vieta, and I got a 1 or 2. And from there on out, I just had no confidence in math.
End of year exams, how did those go in math?
They did not go well. I think I got like a high 4.
And less than a year later, when you sat your final exams, what did you score?
So I got a 7.
Hello, Alex. How's it going?
It's going good. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you for taking the time today. Do you want to let everyone know where you are at the moment?
So right now I'm in Dublin, Ireland, studying physics in Trinity College, Dublin.
Okay, so just to give everyone a bit of a background, before you started IB, you had recently transferred to a new school. Is that right?
In year 11, yeah.
In year 11. Now, for context, year 11 is the year before DP, your school.
Yeah.
And what were your IB subjects?
So for my higher levels, I had biology, physics, math AAHL, and I had French B. And my standards were geography and English lang and lit.
I started working with you as a tutor just before the diploma program started. How were you feeling about math at the time?
So math was my biggest weakness. I remember my very first test in year 11, it was on Vieta, and I got a 1 or 2. And from there on out, I just had no confidence in math. Every test that I would study for, I would always do bad, and I'd always keep trying, but it would never really work out in year 11.
How would you say the first year of the diploma program went? Was it an improvement at all?
It was definitely super stressful, especially with like the new subject, TOK, and then the introduction to the EE, and then the IAs were very, very stressful. So it was a lot at the same time, and I found it hard to balance my organization for the coming year.
Okay, so at the end of the year, end of year exams, how did those go in math?
So for math specifically in year 12, they didn't go well. They did not go
Mm.
well. I remember I think I got like a high 4. and I don't think I got a 5. So yeah, math took another hit.
And less than a year later, when you sat your final exams, what did you score?
So I got a 7. I managed
Nice.
to get a 7. Yeah.
It's amazing, really an amazing turnaround, and I think it's an achievement that could be inspiring for a lot of people.
Mm,
So let's talk about how you did it.
let's
If
do
there
it.
was one piece of advice, if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice as you started the diploma program, what would that advice be?
I think the most important thing when you start the diploma program is to organize yourself, and specifically in terms of the topics that you'll be going through throughout those 2 years in each of your courses. Like for physics, you'd have a folder with A1, A2, A3. With biology, you'd have however many different topics. So it's important to get yourself ready so when you do start that topic, you can file those papers and whatever study notes you have into that specific folder so you know what you've done and what you're going to do.
Once you settled into your rhythm, what was the system that you had more or less for studying? How did you make sure you understood concepts that were covered in class? How much did you study before tests and what was your approach? Just want to get a picture of how you were studying in year 13.
So in year 13 was when I actually started to properly study more, because in year 12 I was a bit flimsy in terms of when I'd study and what I'd study. But when year 13 came around, especially around like a couple months before the mocks, that's when I would set goals for myself, telling myself, oh, you need to do this practice paper 1, practice paper 2. And especially after a test, you'd always look back on your test, see what you did wrong, what you did right, because I think it is important to give yourself confidence from test 2. I
Yeah.
think that sets your path to greatness, hopefully.
How much time were you spending on math every week? Not at the final stretch, but
Hmm.
just throughout the second year.
Throughout the second year, I'd say per week, like 6, 7 hours. I would
Just
study
for
a
math.
lot of math, yeah, just for math. And it didn't really work out that well before that final stretch. So that's why it was really, really frustrating studying so much and it not really working out.
Was there something that was different in your final stretch of study that made it work?
It's a good question. I think, well, if the final stretch includes the mocks, because the mocks is where, in math specifically, was where I actually saw all that time working out because I managed to get a 6 in both
Mm.
paper 1 and 2. But then in paper 3, that's when the overall grade took a hit where I got a 3 or a 2 in paper 3. So, but it was really in that final stretch and after that mock where I told myself, like, it is working. You know, what you did worked. And that gave me such a boost of confidence to
Yeah.
make me go through that final push.
So it sounds like before the mock, you were doing all of this study,
Mm.
but you didn't know that it was working. What did it feel like to be studying? How did it seem like you were understanding things? What was the emotion that you felt while you were studying?
I think a lot of it was I'd give myself too much leniency where I'd tell myself, just look at the answer and then you can redo it and that's it. Like you learned it. So that was a big mistake now that I think of it. And I do definitely recommend just to throw yourself into it and not try to give yourself any leniency because you won't get any leniency in the mocks nor the IB exams.
Did you have a sense that you were getting better through this study, or was it just sort of like a frustrating, never-ending rule that you weren't actually sure was leading anywhere?
It just felt like a cycle. It felt
Yeah.
like I was studying for the specific in-class tests, whether it was vectors or whatever. And when the test finally came around, the questions were always harder than what I studied for. And whenever I saw a question that I thought I knew, I wrote out the first couple of lines, then I forgot the rest. And then when the results came out, it was always 4.
Would you say, in retrospect, that you were trying to prepare for questions almost by seeing all the possible questions that could pop up on your test?
I think memorization was one of my biggest flaws, and specifically for maybe biology students, because I definitely put a lot of time into bio. I tried to memorize, I think a lot of my study, like a lot of ways of studying for biology kind of leaked into math. So
Yeah.
what you just described, I think happened a lot. Yeah.
If you had to summarize in one or two sentences, what should you do as a student if you're not memorizing?
So if you're not memorizing, there is a pattern to maths. So in a way, there is a sort of memorization of the patterns, but not the questions. For vectors, you need to know the formats. You need to remember every detail, but the numbers are always interchangeable. The signs are always interchangeable. So I think for studying, it's really diversify the questions that you take on because you don't know what you're going to get in the mocks nor the final exams. So you really have
Yeah.
to go through as many questions as possible, many different questions, especially.
So you're in your final stretch, right? Are you studying mostly from past papers? Were you using the question bank on Perplex?
So my main sources and what I used to study was definitely Perplex and then past papers. So for the last, well, since from the mocks to the final exams, it would only be those two things. And I'd set myself a goal the night before, telling myself, okay, paper 1, paper 2, and then like Perplex, I spend an hour or two on. And then I would obviously organize my other subjects also in a similar fashion.
So when you finish a past paper, what's your process for going over it and learning from what went well and what didn't go well?
So for past papers, I would spend the time necessary and I'd actually take a break afterwards because have such adrenaline that I feel like if I went straight to correcting my answers, it would be frustrating. I wouldn't be able to learn from it, and actually learning from your mistakes is obviously super important. So I'd take a 15-minute, 20-minute break, and then I'd go back and go through all the mark schemes and make sure that I'd actually redo the questions 10 minutes or 20 minutes later to make sure that I learned from it.
So, as you're correcting this past paper, how are you keeping track of your weak areas?
So I'll definitely not only note down the question again, like screenshot it on my laptop and put it in a file to redo later. But if I manage to do the question, I'd turn to Perplex and go to a certain topic and try the same difficulty, especially if it's a question 12 or 13 on the past paper. I'd go to like one of the most difficult questions on Perplex to really challenge myself and see if I properly learned from my mistake.
So after your mocks, you had at least a first sign that things were working out a little bit better. Paper three was still a struggle, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But as the first May paper one rolled around, how did you feel walking into the exam hall that day? Did you feel prepared?
So for the final IB exams in math, it was definitely my most stressful subject. I walked into the exam hall with actually quite a lot of confidence. It's not just because of the mocks, but because it was the final moment. And I knew that for those next like 3 hours, I would put everything into it. And whatever I got was the best I could do. And especially after talking to my parents and my friends, a lot of reassurance in terms of, especially if you don't do well throughout the year. And then I thought, let me just put everything into this and see how well I do.
So you were May 24th, I think, time zone B,
Yeah.
which was it has had a reputation for being a wickedly hard paper one. Tell us what that was like.
So the paper one was very, very difficult. Even during like I'd turn around and the expression on my friends' faces were just like they didn't know what to do. And then my face probably looked like that too. And it was more I remember a few of the questions because my method was I'd start from the hardest questions and I'd work my way back, especially time management was a big problem, but paper one was definitely the hardest. But compared to paper two, it was still very very difficult, but then paper three was easiest far. And that's why, like I said earlier, you have to try every sort of question, even the easiest ones, because the easiest ones, they may not count for a lot in the actual exam, but they can always like cut your confidence in half, and then you
Yeah.
don't think straight for the following questions.
I'm curious because when you started IB, did you know that this is how the IB writes exams?
I had no idea. To be honest, I didn't really look into my courses as much as I should have, which I definitely think students should.
What are some things you know about the IB now that you think students who are just starting should keep in mind and be aware?
I think just the fact that the IB can throw anything and everything at you, everything that is within those those boundaries of what you need to know, they can use everything against you, you know. So yeah, you really have to just know your syllabus back to front to make sure they can catch you out for those 2 3 marks.
Let's talk about that paper three because your year was the first session where the IB increased the time that you had on the paper three. And that was because every year there's been an outcry about how insanely difficult the paper threes are. And it seems like, in May 2025, they finally decided that they had to temper these things
Yeah,
down a
yeah,
little
yeah.
bit. Um, so do you remember anything about your paper three? What was it like compared to what you practiced on?
The paper three was definitely the paper that I feared the most because it was so different to the paper one and the paper two. And I remember the past papers in 2024, 2023, I found them extremely difficult. And that's why I went into the three with barely any confidence and just thinking, I hope I do well on the paper one and the two. So I managed to at least get like a five or a six. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the paper three, I remember not only did we get so much more time that by the end, like I was just waiting, flipping through my booklet 2 or 3 times, making sure I didn't mess up like a negative or positive sign. And even the questions themselves I found were quite easy. And even after the exam, talking to some of my friends, we all agreed that the exam just wasn't that difficult. It was much easier than the previous years. And then for a second, I was like, oh, maybe I messed up.
Do you have any practical tips for the day of the exam for students who might be approaching their assessments soon?
So for the day specifically, I feel like you definitely have to be as relaxed as possible. So definitely sleeping well the night before, because I remember for a couple of my exams, I'd go to bed quite late because I would study. But in hindsight, those 2 hours of studying is not worth the extra 2 hours of sleeping, especially because, a lack of sleep generates stress, etc., etc. So therefore, on the day, it is important to stay as relaxed and to help with that sense of being calm, try to block out a good amount of what others are saying, especially because you're in a different position to everybody else and nobody knows what you're going through and vice versa. You don't know what everybody else has done or how they've prepared or et cetera, et cetera. So I definitely think it is important to stay in your own zone as much as possible. And if you can, or if you have to talk to a lot of people, just try to stay confident and positive, because I definitely think positivity is very, very important on such a stressful day.
I want to talk about the IA a little bit. What did you write your IA about?
So I wrote my IA on a catenary function, specifically a power line that was outside of my house. So I did quite well on it. Well, my teacher predicted it quite well, but then in the end, I got a 14 out of 20, which I still think is okay, but is not as good as I thought it would be, let's say.
Yeah. So whether it was you that was moderated down or other people in the class
Yeah.
that pulled everyone, there's no way of knowing. But it is something I think it's important that students bear in mind that it doesn't just matter what your teacher thinks.
Yeah.
These papers are going to be moderated, and the reason it's important is specifically for the personal engagement points.
Mm.
If your teacher knows that you were very personally engaged, that you asked loads of questions and you did all these things, it doesn't matter if it's not obvious in your essay because the examiner is going to read your essay, is not going to see the personal engagement, and there's no way for the teacher to let the examiner know that you had all this personal engagement. So I don't know if that was the problem in your case, but it's a very common thing that students don't bother to communicate a lot of the things that they actually did because they sort of
Mm.
told the teacher, oh, the teacher's grading it. But it's
Yeah.
really important that everything gets written down. How long did it take you to write your IA?
So my IA for math specifically, I went over the deadline by like a day or two, and my teacher definitely wasn't happy. But my IA, it took around, I'd say like 9, 10 hours, especially because I'd make a lot of mistakes. I'd always have to go through it again and again. That's mainly because I didn't look up on what I actually needed fully on the math IA before starting it. That just wasted a couple hours just because I simply didn't know the guidelines. So I definitely
Yeah.
recommend that too.
If you had to sort of distill your IA advice, if you were coaching someone who's writing their IA now at a high level, what makes a good IA?
What makes a good IA is definitely something that the student enjoys, because you can see when a student enjoys the topic that they chose, because there's so much, they use different words, or they're willing to add that extra detail or an extra like edit on a graph. And I think that can be important to an examiner, even if it's a small detail. So I definitely say choose something that you do like and be very clear and concise what you're trying to explain to the examiner via your IA.
How do you figure out that you liked catenary curves and that you wanted to model this power line?
So it's kind of interesting because I was talking to a friend who was doing vector calculus at the time, and I scroll on this random video of a power line and how to model a catenary function. And the person in the video, they use a chain, which follows the same principles as a power line. And then I remember my friends telling me about their IAs and how they choose things from like their own life and what they'd see quite often. And that's when I decided to use a power line.
So a few months later, you get your results. How did you feel?
So when I went onto that website, which is a bit terrifying, I have to say, where you click on that box and it's just revealed. Um, it was quite scary. I was very, very nervous. It landed on my birthday, the 6th of July. So I would admit it because I wouldn't open them at 2 o'clock, I think was when they were released. I kept it until 7, mainly because I was just so stressed. But when I went through it, it just gradually got better and better. And I didn't expect it, especially math was the last one in that, yeah, in the list. And when I clicked on it, like honestly, I expected a 5. And then when I saw a 7, I couldn't believe it. I checked the top of the page to make sure it was my name. And then I went on the total points and I saw what I got, and I was relieved. I was surprised and relieved. I think mainly relieved because although it's an exam, it does dictate a lot of, your academics, and especially for me specifically, and I feel like a lot of people can relate to this, it does tell you in a way what you're capable of, and it does show you what your time is worth in a way.
Would you say in the end that the effort was worth it?
I think so. Definitely think
Yeah.
so. I'm in my first choice of my uni and my course, and even though it was grueling, even though many times I just wanted to give up, to be honest, because I thought there'd be no point. I thought it'd be like every in-class test where I'd just get a simple 4, but turned out to be
Yeah.
very different to those in-class tests.
Yeah, I will say, I don't know if this is the case at every school, but I've seen it at many different schools. The in-class tests are significantly harder than what you're going to see on the final exam. Oftentimes, these questions are handpicked to be the hardest one from a particular topic, and they set the grade boundary for a 7 at like 90 or 92%. And then everyone is sad all year that they're getting 4s and 5s. And then a lot of people perform better than they expect on the final exams
Mm.
if you have those kind of tests. Do you have any final words of wisdom for us, Alex?
So from what you just said, I should definitely say that you should not dictate your like academic capabilities on in-class tests, because, or even teachers for that matter, although they might see what you're capable in school, they don't really see how you study or what you do outside of school. And however, like how many difficulties or whatever you might be going through outside, is definitely important to acknowledge yourself first before you acknowledge like the class in class tests or whatever anybody says about you, because like you just said, in different schools in class tests can be easier, harder. So there's no base to it, and you shouldn't base what you're capable of on simple tests like that.
Yeah. Just to put a wrap on this, I'll say at the end of year 12, you were talking to me about dropping down to AASL.
Yeah.
And I even heard some teachers were recommending that you do that as well. In the end, you got a 7 in AAHL. So for anyone out there who's struggling, who's working hard, who's stressed, anything is possible. You just have to decide that you want it and put in the work. Anything is possible. Thank you so much for taking the time to inspire us today, Alex. You
Thank
really
you.
pulled up an amazing result. I'm very proud of the work you put in.
Thank you very much, James.
Of course, good luck with university. You're going to kill physics too.
Yeah, I know I will.
I've given you a lot of information, and I know that this can be overwhelming because it's exactly the reason that we founded Perplex. The goal of our platform is to take the burden of all of this planning and organization off of you so that you can focus on the math, which, let's be honest, is hard enough as it is. On perplex.org, you'll find the most detailed notes anywhere on every topic, as well as interactive animated lessons for every subject that you might be struggling with. We also have over 1,000 IB-style questions that you can practice on, and they're conveniently organized by topic and by difficulty. If you tell us what you're studying and which things you've yet to cover, we can tailor the resources to you so you always know what's going to be most effective for your learning and what to do next. If you thought this video was helpful, please like and subscribe. We're constantly working on new content to help IB students succeed. And if you have any questions, please shoot them in the comments below and I'll try my best to get back to you. Good luck studying, and I'll see you next time.